Before we go to the serious questions, tell us about yourself. Why? My first question is why you chose journalism as your career. What motivates you?
I found it difficult to escape because I came from a family of journalists. My father's father were journalists, and his father also. So I tried other things and then decided I've got to see if I can do radio, television, writing. And that was now a long time ago.
Where have you been before, like including the BBC?
I started work after university in 1970. You can tell how old I am now. Okay. And I went to the BBC first of all and got a job there. And then I went to the independent television sector, where I spent most of my television career, although I've also done a lot of television for the BBC. And then for the last 30 years, I've also been making programs for the BBC and presenting a weekly program, or domestic program. And I started more recently, 3 years ago, presenting a program for the World Service, which is why I'm here in Ethiopia, which is called World Questions, and it's a debating program very similar to the one that I do in the United Kingdom.
Okay.
But I've reported from all over the world, and I've presented election nights on British television and lots of political programs, and I write a lot of books as well when I can.
Okay. What are the most popular coverage that you have covered so far regarding with Ethiopia?
Well, I first came here in 1973, and I suppose the word is exposed the famine in Wollo, and the film, because the famine was not known about around the world, or indeed very much in Ethiopia, there was a cover-up when it was revealed, and it was a terrible, terrible series of horrors. That went viral around the world, and all the world knew, and a great deal of money was raised to come to Ethiopia to help the victims of the famine. Politically, as a result of that, Haileselassie fell from power because, in part because of the famine, and in part because the Derg, as it came to power to take Haileselassie, took my film and intercut it with pictures of the emperor having a good life and enjoying himself, as if to say he didn't care about the famine. My own view, that was very unfair. I think he did not know what was happening in Wollo. It was concealed from him as well as from the world. Anyway, as a result of that, I was able to come back to Ethiopia a great deal during the early days of the Derg. But I became very critical when the Red Terror campaign started, and I was then banned for 10 years. Came back in 1987. I was critical again and was banned again. Since 1991 and the arrival of Meles, I've been able to come freely as a foreign correspondent, as most other foreign correspondents have. So I've followed Ethiopia's story now for 45 years very closely. And Ethiopia, for me, both professionally and personally, is very important in my life.
Do you think Haileselassie hid the famine? Do you think he hid it intentionally?
No, I think that Haileselassie was unaware of the famine. I think he was surrounded by powerful figures in the regions as well as in Addis, who made it their business to conceal from him unpleasant facts. And they didn't want to acknowledge the truth about what was happening in Wollo, because to do so would have shown them to be failing rather than succeeding in their positions. I think that's what was happening. I do not personally believe that Haileselassie was saying, oh, there's a famine in Wollo, no problem. Of course not.
So, how did you get the response after you wrote that story?
Well, the film...
The global responses.
The film was shown in the United Kingdom on the ITV network, on the BBC network. It then went round the world to every country, and it was shown in all those countries, and people were shocked and horrified. It was the first time, I think, on television that such a scene of suffering had been presented. I just reported the facts. The Ethiopian government at that time said that I'd made it up, or that the images weren't true, which was really very silly, because that just confirmed the feeling that they were hiding or trying to hide what was self-evident, that people were hungry, that people were starving, and that people, including a great many children, were dying. We had the corpses on the screen.
So, I need to ask you, who told you about the famine was in here?
Good question.
Because in that time, there was not internet. There
was certainly no social media.
Yes.
I had a friend who was actually from Sri Lanka at my university, who got in touch with me, and she was studying in Holland, and she had met a group of Ethiopian students who said there is a big problem in our country, in Ethiopia. And she knew that I was by then a journalist, reporter, and she rang me and said, you ought to follow this. And I don't know what's happening, she said, but this is what they are saying. So I came back to Addis, and in fact, students who've always been extremely important in the life of Ethiopia had at the university tried to draw attention to the fact that people were streaming in earlier months, were streaming from Wollo into the capital in search of food. They tried to draw attention to that, and I think so. When we arrived and we said it was called the problem of drought, and so I went up with my team and we filmed what we saw.
So did you get permission?
We had permission to come. We had to have visas. We had permission to come to the country. We had visas, and we had a minder with us who was with us all the time. The minder was so shocked by what he saw that he said, just film what you want. When I got back to Addis, the Minister of Information, who was an army officer, tried to intimidate me, saying, you've just been showing bad things, lying about our country. And I said, I just filmed what I saw. And I thought maybe I might not be allowed to take the film out, but in fact I was. And so the film was shown in October 1973.
Okay, so what was the response of Haileselassie after you broadcast?
He went up to, I have never met Haileselassie. He went up to Wollo, to the region, and expressed his sympathy. So far as I understand it, I saw pictures, that's all I know. And I presume that he was shocked by what he found. But by then it was too late for his own rule, because there was other agitation, there were strikes, the taxi drivers were on strike, students were protesting, and the combination of that unrest led to the radical young army officers effectively seizing power.
Okay. As a journalist, we have emotion. What was your feeling when you saw such drastic drought? I
was horrified. I'd been in Africa before. I'd been in the Sahel before, and I had seen hunger, and I knew that hunger was endemic in many parts of Africa amongst the poor people. And I was shocked by the combination of the level of suffering, the amount, the scale of suffering and dying, and the fact that there was nothing being done, virtually nothing. One health worker in Dessie itself, and a priest trying to help as well. Otherwise, nothing. And that was very, very shocking. I must be very honest, I was a journalist. So I was both shocked and thought, what can I do? And then thought, as a journalist, what an astonishing story to tell the world that this is happening. So I had those two emotions, horror, shock on the one hand, and I have a scoop on the other hand. That's my honest answer.
Okay, let's jump this issue. My question is, and what makes a journalist to be a good reporter?
I think curiosity, wanting to learn, wanting to understand, to explore, being accurate insofar as it's possible, being honest, being fair, not being frightened to tell the truth as you see it. Now, that is easy to say. If you live in a country like the United Kingdom, it is easy, despite the pressures. In some parts of the world, that is very difficult.
Okay. So, how do you evaluate the development of journalism profession across the world on your understanding?
I think it's I've been involved with organisations that have actively sought to help the process of development by mentoring, by advising, and I think there is much greater professionalism now in journalism around the world. There are still lots of problems. I think it's extremely important for journalists. Having opinions is important, of course, and all journalists, like everyone, has the right to have opinions. But the opinions should be quite carefully related to the evidence to have, I think, validity, particularly in those parts of the world which are prone to unrest, conflict and division. Okay.
Neutrality. To be neutral is a big issue when we talk about journalism. Whether we mention about Al Jazeera, CNN, even the local medias, they tend to incline on some other party, some other groups. So how can we, not perfectly to be neutral, but to more inclined to neutrality?
I think I wouldn't use the word neutral. I would use the word impartial. It's not right to be neutral about apartheid. It's not sensible to be neutral about climate change. You can't say maybe there's climate change, maybe not. You can, but I think that's a bit silly. You have to be accurate. More important to be accurate than to be neutral. But in the BBC, and that's the essence of the BBC, the credibility of the BBC, which is different from a newspaper, which is of course free to have wider opinions, is that the BBC is impartial in assessing evidence and in presenting it to its audience, whether it's in the United Kingdom or, as in the case of the World Service, to 80 million people around the world.
That's good. So you have done a lot of jobs with a lot of political and economical issues. So have you got threatened from people on the work that you have done?
Have I been, sorry?
Threatened by people.
Treated?
Yes.
I've been treated mostly quite well. People who have watched programs or read what I have written have been, on the whole, quite positive. Of course, there are critics as well. Sometimes in different countries of the world I've been treated quite aggressively. I've found myself once briefly in prison, even before I'd started to film or to report. And in other places I've been intimidated, or governments and their agents have tried to intimidate. And you have to just learn to live with that and not be intimidated. And what I learnt is, never get angry. If you get angry, it's a problem. And this is very calculated.
Like simple, it's a human nature. When people go to bad email, a treated message, they try to consider, should I leave this job? Maybe something like that. What's your advice when journalists face such kind of situation?
I think it's very, very difficult for me to give advice to people who are living in a situation which I have not had to live in. If I have a family and I am feeling threatened, I completely understand if someone says, I don't want to go on banging my head against this brick wall. I don't want to live with the uncertainty, with the fear that I'm going to be punished, that I'm going to be put in prison, that I'm going to be killed. I mean, journalists around the world are killed for trying to report, and they're imprisoned, and that is a terrible fact, because at their best, journalists are critically important for revealing the truth and the reality of what is happening, and that is usually why they're being killed, because they are revealing the truth. So I don't say to any particular journalist, you should do this or you should do that. I don't have the authority to do that. I just understand the challenge, the huge challenge that some journalists in some parts of the world face.
That's good. The world is dynamic. Now in Ethiopia, breaking news is not coming from the broadcast or the print, from the social media, and the social media is challenging, the mainstream. So how can this stream media, the mainline medias, are cope up with the social media? And how do you see the social media news are distracting and benefiting the world people?
This is the huge challenge that faces all countries everywhere. How social media in general is a good thing. It allows people to communicate with one another. It allows people to describe what is happening in their lives. It allows people to give opinions. However, it also gives freedom for those who want to provide falsehoods, who want to agitate, who offer fake news in order to achieve their own agenda. And that is very disturbing. It's not easy to know what the solution is. The principal, it seems to me, role of the mainstream media in this is to offer a service to the public that says, you can trust us. You can trust us to be doing our best to tell the truth. You can trust us to point out what is fake news. It's very difficult for governments to do it, because governments are always being accused themselves of providing fake news. It is a role of a responsible media that is in the mainstream, newspapers, radio, television, to offer a fair, just, accurate portrait of what is happening, in the belief, and I have that belief, that most people will say, and increasingly I think people do, the young are beginning to be much more aware of the problem of fake news. Look how much fake news is provided by the President of the United States, denouncing fake news when it's accurate, and people kind of are aware of the issue of fake news, and it is a critically big issue. No short term, no simple answer.
That's good. There is ongoing war in Syria, in Libya, to somehow in South Sudan. And some people blaming that the media is one of the factors that aggravating the situation, like by denying the right professional journalism. By your understanding, on such scenario, the media is working on the professional manner?
I can't speak about that particular issue because I don't know enough about it. In general, I think journalists have to look themselves in the eye and say, am I being honest? Am I being accurate? Am I being fair?
Okay, that's fine. There is a diversity in every world. So how can the media treat this diversity world?
That's a big question. Diversity can so easily become conflict between people of different ethnic groups, different religions. Look at the appalling things that are happening around the world, in Europe, in Asia, in this continent, in Latin America, conflicts which spring from, in part, from people's inability to welcome diversity. Diversity is the essence of the world community. We have to respect diversity. We have to embrace diversity. And my own view is that we, on the one hand, have made lots of advances in that direction, but on the other hand, there are powerful voices that are antagonistic to diversity and want to be exclusive. protect their own group, their own religion, their own ethnic group, their own nationality. And I think that is a very powerful and very negative force.
Okay. So there must be aware of this situation. There must be curbed if they face such kind of challenges. But like as we talk, it's not easy to do that.
If it was easy, you and I wouldn't need to have a job, because the world would be one big happy family. Okay. It's not. I've been in this trade of journalism a long, long time. When I was young and when I started, I thought, if I report this and there's something bad happening, well, of course, people will do something about it. They'll solve the problem. Actually, what happens is one problem leads to another. Maybe that problem solved, it leads to another problem. When I was young, social media didn't exist. Okay. When I was young, we didn't talk about climate change. When I was young, the extreme problems of development were really hardly discussed in the Western world. These are now major global questions.
Because there are two debates. Some say that journalism is a profession, it needs training. And the other say journalism is not a profession. Anyone can enter into it if he or she has the passion to do that.
I think it has to be treated as a profession, which is to say you need to be trained, you need to be skilled, and you need to have values that are agreed generally within your own profession. I think it's very dangerous, though, to treat it to become self-important about your profession. No, your job is to observe. It's a pretty rough job in lots of ways. You can't be friends with those in power except by accident. You are only friendly to the facts and the truth.
That's good. Like in other fields, journalism, the media, people are also vulnerable to corruption. In Africa, in Ethiopia, when journalism gets the box,
gets bought.
Yes, they deny the information or the right green story about that company or institution. So, how can we combat such kind of things?
It's not unique to Africa. The ability of journalists to become cozy with the employer is tempting, and in some cases, people succumb to that temptation. I don't think you can legislate for it. You can simply hope that journalists have their own values and say, I must not be bought by this person. That's all you can do.
My last questions. In your career, what are the big challenges you have encountered so far?
The complexity of the world in which we live. The awareness that we so often just touch the surface. The knowledge that unless we have a sense of the past and of history that illuminates the present, we can't describe the present adequately. The fact that we are constantly in a hurry, on the move. The problem evolving questions relating to social media and the challenge social media faces. And I think the ability of those in power very often not to suppress by physical means necessarily, by imprisonment or by torture, not that, but all over the world, the ability of those in power to prevent their citizens having information, having the available facts, to their ability to manipulate the facts, to conceal truth when they want to conceal it, to give you a version of the truth when they want to win your support. Those are complicated issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you for our time.
Pleasure.
Okay.